All right, I've got a new microphone, and welcome back to Museum Technologies. Once again, I've been breaking down my review of these concepts into three basic categories. Last few times we've been looking at preservation, how museums use technology in the tasks of keeping stuff, the presentation and education side of things, where museums show off the stuff, they teach people about the stuff, and today we're going to start looking a little bit at the promotion or business end of things. Museums have to be in the business of advertising themselves. They need to get people in the door. They need to pay the rent. They have to manage their membership lists. They have to woo donors. And these tasks require tools. So a membership database is a real common tool, necessity really for a museum. They have to be able to track who is involved with the museum. Uh, there needs to be efforts made in terms of marketing. You need to reach a public, you need to reach an audience, you need to get potentially more people to come be part of your audience. You need to have the people who are in your existing audience aware of events and exhibitions and reasons to come to the museum. The website, any place that's any place has a website. You have to. It's a necessity in the world we live in today to be able to provide information who are not physically close enough to find out what's going on or what your address is and how to get there. It has really taken the place of what, and gone, of course, above and beyond it to the millionth degree from when I was growing up, when we would use the Yellow Pages telephone book. But it's as fundamental now as that was then. And then social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, etc., putting out information on a persistent, consistent basis so that people, again, have access to know what's going on, the reasons why they should be involved, and also an opportunity, importantly and differently, to provide feedback about those things. So that's some subcategories of this division I'm talking about. So with regard specifically to membership software, right, so you want to know who is coming to the museum and where they're coming from. You can track demographics a bit depending on how much information you ask for when people come into the museum, if you've got a place to record it. You want to know who is a member of the museum. You want to be able to reward the people that are members of the museum. You want to give them incentives to be members of the museum because they pay money to be members of the museum. You want to know who comes to an event or events, because you want to have them as part of a target audience when you have similar events and give them more reasons to come back to the museum. You want to know who gives things to the museum so that you can encourage them to do that. If you're in the business of building a collection, you want people to give you things to that collection, and so you need to know who it is that you might be asking and encouraging in that direction. You want to know who gives money to the museum. I don't think I need to explain to any extent why you would want to know that. And you want to know how can you get them to do all of these things more. So again, this is the purpose basically of the membership software largely and most commonly. There's a list of some of the packages that are commercially available to meet these needs at this link here for idealware.org. I encourage you to take a look through them, browse them, see if you can tell what any of the differences in how they promote their packages are and how that might be of more interest to one institution or another for different reasons. There's a link here for a package called Greater Giving. Greater Giving allows a sort of cloud-based platform for doing some of these tasks. Alltrue and Razor's Edge are products from a company called Blackbaud. They provide tools for tracking ticketing, entrance fee, and information related to that, and then also fundraising and relationship management. It says right in the link there. Again, to accomplish some of those tasks that I've listed at the upper right of the slide. Right, so how else are you reaching your public, right? I've got some links here to the concept of broadcasting, broadcast media. I, on occasion, will lecture about how things have changed. When I was growing up, you could really rely upon the high probability that anyone that you met in the course of your day had access to the same information that you did via television and newspaper and magazines and radio. Um, the fact was those things were limited in their geographical distribution. If you lived within a certain number of miles of a radio station's antenna, broadcasting antenna, then you could listen to that radio station. And the same thing worked that way for television prior to the advent of cable and other subscription television platforms. And newspapers and magazines, that's fairly obvious. That meant that, as I said, you could make these assumptions that the thing that you'd heard on the radio, there was a good chance the people that you interacted with had also heard on the radio. The thing that you saw in the paper, they might very well have also seen, and that meant a kind of exponential value for advertising in a way, because you got the potential for word-of-mouth discussion beyond just that you'd put out in the physical or audio or visual form. But that was, there was a kind of concentration of where the effects of your effort landed. As we have now emerged into a post-broadcast society, in my opinion, people have such a variety of choices about where they get their information. Even if some of the media sort of persist into the web, the internet, and social media, and blogs, and other channels of information dispersal, it's almost equally possible to get it from anywhere that you are in the globe, with some barriers of language potentially, and speed of connection and that kind of thing. But there's really less and less reason to assume that someone who might be next to you on the sidewalk somewhere in the course of your day has seen the same stories or heard the same stories that you have. And I think this is really a concept that's under-discussed, and I think it's something that really is having an incredibly dramatic impact on the effectiveness of paid advertising, because you really have to think about where you're spending your dollars to get maximum effect, whereas it was a much more limited pool in the past. So I think institutions are still catching up with how to make an effective use of the options that are currently available. So here are some links to blogs and articles regarding museum use of Twitter, museum use of Instagram, and museum use of Facebook. Some of them are sort of critical articles, some of them are just sort of best of. But if you will take a look at these, you will get an idea about how, at least as these articles are already pretty dated, 2008, 2012, 2014. I realize that those are already ancient history in some ways, but it's worth reading these to understand the emerging concepts of how these things were changing how museums approach their public. And I've got screen captures here of the Getty's Twitter feed, the Getty's Instagram feed, Museum of Modern Arts, and of course the Getty's Facebook page, and then those same three channels, if you will, for the Museum of Modern Art. And it's interesting to look at them, and you can kind of compare the kind of information that's being shared via each of these channels by each of these institutions, and decide whether you think there's a difference in effectiveness or quality. But at any rate, they're doing it, right? And someone on staff has the job of doing these things, and they have to have an understanding of these tools, and they have to have access to the things they need to do to make them interesting to the public. So that'll mean at least an ability to process images, right, to capture and deliver images. And then, you folks will have a personal understanding of how this stuff is effective or not effective when you look at these sites. But please do look. So again, here's a little bit more of these sort of considerations about how museums are making use of an internet presence to promote themselves, to interact with their audience. Um, there is a lot that can be said about critically about missed opportunities, um, about lack of understanding of their target audience. Again, I think in this transition from a broadcast mentality, um, there are you know there are many aspects to consider in judging effectiveness, and it's hard to know unless you're actually doing visitor surveys on site whether people or to what extent people have interacted with the various forms of access online. But there are some surveys that have been done that say that most people do um, have some sort of online interaction with the museum prior to going there. It's a very common thing that that's the case. And there's also a certain segment that will engage with the museum online after a visit. So, and it's easy to imagine that in the planning of a visit, you might want to go to a site to look up the physical address, to see if you've got a map, to see if there's information about entry fee and parking and things like that, and then perhaps to see if the exhibitions that are currently on display are of interest to you, and what hours they're available for your access, that kind of thing. Um, Again, I see the website still fulfilling those basic informational concepts. The Facebook is a similar tool in a way, with a possibility for more constantly updated content, which is supposed to engage with the more increasingly short-term attention span and level of interest of our publics. And then Instagram is that sort of like flash in your face, catch your eye, and Twitter is somewhere in another dimension from those things, with the idea of sort of this live relationship of constantly updated information and tidbits that are supposed to draw you in, I suppose. So, on this slide, I've got some links to some examples of how museums are reaching a public with an online presence. The first one is a link to some virtual collections to browse. The second one is a link to some behind-the-scenes sort of videos presented by a museum, in this case part of the Smithsonian. The rest of it here, other ways in which the museums are using online presence to inform or involve their public. And then the last link on this page is a YouTube video. It's a clip from a film, which I admit is a little dated now, regarding future use of technology, in this case in a library, but I find it a little entertaining and inspirational, so I hope you will enjoy that as well. So, actually winding down anyway, I should have written very clearly www.artsteps.com. If you just put artsteps.com, for some reason it will not redirect all the time. That's the site in which I'm going to ask you to build a virtual exhibition for our project. It's fairly straightforward. Again, you can create a free account using your IVC email, and I want you to put your images in, and if you were planning to include objects that were not flat images, choose flat representational images anyway, and put them on the walls. Consider the actual size of the things and what would actually fit in a room, create some label copy, etc. ehive.com, I had previously been using AdLib Museum Lite, which is more, it is, in fact, if not in simulation, a real collections management software that could be and probably is utilized in real live museums, but it's a little bit complicated and access is a little bit difficult when I can't be there with you to look over your shoulder at a computer screen, and it's not available, as I understand it, for people working on Macintosh platforms. So ehive.com is a slightly less fully functional, well, actually it's considerably less functional, but allows you to go through the basic steps of cataloging as if into a museum collections management software information about your items. So please have a look at those. Start playing with those. Send me questions if you have questions about those. At least www.artsubs.com and ehive.com. Here's a quick look at the ehive.com interface once you get into it. Application, object catalogs types. I made a couple here using art. You can pick a category that will drive the creation of slightly different fields, but I'm not really concerned. Do the one that seems the most appropriate to the items that you're cataloging. This is the kind of screen. This is for the art option off the previous menu. If you fill in the information on the detail fields at least, and then since you're doing a group of things, I would encourage you to consider making them all part of the same acquisition. So if you go to the acquisition tab, you give them a number that would be in common for all the things that you create, whereas the object numbers would all be different on the detail field screen. And I'll be interested to see where you go from there. Here's the output from an example that I put in. Photograph titled A Dream by photographer Tim Vo. And it's an inkjet print, etc. So that's the kind of thing I'm looking for from you at the output. I'm still playing with the application a little bit myself to see if I can get an overview of a group of things at the same time and jump back and forth between them. It seems like it might be too limited to actually do that, but it's worth looking at. So anyway, please be proactive about moving forward with that for your project.